George Kopits is a global fellow with the Wilson Center's Global Europe program. George is also a member of Portugal's Public Finance Council and serves as adjunct faculty at Central European University. He joins us to discuss the latest on the European Union. George, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you, there's so many places we could start because there's so much going on, but maybe I'll ask you to look at the really big picture and just give us sort of the general report card on the European Union. How is it doing? What's the health like today?
Well, there is good news and bad news. The good news is that there is a little bit of an uptick in activity in Europe, so some of the monetary stimulus at least has had some effect. Also, the crisis, to a certain degree, the euro debt crisis, to a certain degree, is behind us. And I think a milestone is the fact that Greece this last week has been able to access the international bond market. Mm-hmm. So that we can say is good news. At the same time, there are pressure points and tensions and uncertainty, which you may interpret as not so good news, but certainly challenges that lie ahead. And there are signs which you could look at saying, hey, we are going in the positive direction, but then there are other signs that really take away from wishful thinking. You could mention Brexit, you could mention...
Well, let me mention a couple of specifics and ask you for comments on each one. Let's start with Brexit. You bring that up. How is that proceeding? Is it happening in a way that is less disruptive? At the time of the vote, there were dire predictions about the economic impact both on the UK and the EU. How is it proceeding?
Well, it's really proceeding in a fitful fashion, particularly on the part of the British establishment, government, parliament, what have you, namely that there are greater divisions we see and a weaker government in the UK than anticipated to take on the project of exiting the EU. At the same time, in Europe, it seems that the positions are more considered, carefully designed, if you wish. They're more prepared than in the UK. One would have thought, naively perhaps, after the referendum, that the opposite would be the case, that the 27 countries would have difficulties in coming to a common position. Now what we see is that it's the UK itself has difficulties in developing a common position, and there are a number of uncertainties. First of all, within the cabinet itself, and then of course you see Parliament. There could be surprises along the way, but certainly there is a whole spectrum of differences between very hard exit without agreement practically on anything, and a very smooth, soft, some say, others smooth, which in name is going to be an exit, but de facto it might be something less than that.
Some sort of hybrid type arrangement. Right. Well, the election of Emmanuel Macron, the French election was another marker that people look to see the health of the EU. Does this help for those who support the continuation of the Union?
Certainly, in strengthening the Union. For one thing, well, the Brexit itself appears to actually bring together the members in their common pursuit, but also Macron, and together with Merkel, who all the pundits point out, and it is reasonable to assume that she's going to become the next chancellor, from the president to the next chancellor, with a coalition possibly with the Greens and the Liberals. So that the two of them, along with, to perhaps shade difference, Spain and Italy are the core countries. If they can develop a common position, and the common position on moving, or if it's not common, totally common, but at least come to a consensus on how to move forward, then I think instead of falling apart, there's a good chance of hanging together.
What are the greatest barriers to forming that consensus? You could go down a checklist: immigration, the debt crisis, which you now say is largely past, or at least trending in the right direction, conflict in Ukraine, terrorism, all these things that have been disruptive and have caused some people to question the Union. Could you create a hierarchy for us of what are the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging actually is not so much in dealing with each one of these points, which each one by itself is a disruption. But the most challenging is to have a common position on how federal or how centralized Europe should be. Should there be a core, which is likely to be the case, and then peripheral countries that are not so united? So you would have, you know, my opinion is that if the Union is going to prevail, there should be a core of Euro area countries where there is a federal structure of the type that is in fact envisaged in Maastricht. And in fact, this is what we can attribute in this country as to Alexander Hamilton. Mm-hmm. The idea of a federal structure where in fact you have the subsidiary principle applied in full. What do I mean by subsidiary principle? Which I think is known, but it's like, you know, the bourgeois gentilhomme thinking that, hey, I'm learning how to speak prose. In fact, we are speaking prose all the time, where it's understood that there are certain functions of government which can be more efficiently performed at a higher level rather than a lower level of government. Everybody agrees that garbage collection should be at the municipal level, but monetary policy, defense, you know, foreign relations, environmental policy should be at a supranational level or at the federal level, as we call it in the US, central level. There are always going to be tensions, you know, in defining what is what. But the idea is to proceed in that direction. And some of these items that you mentioned, some of these issues, some of these imponderables or disruptions can serve to actually herd at least the core countries, the Eurozone countries, to a more centralized position, to a central budget. For example, in defense, you know, the fact that you have the Ukrainian crisis and even further Syrian and terrorism, you know, brings them more and more towards the idea of having a common defense policy.
So from
by the same token, a common foreign policy. You know, so that those are, and then in addition to that, something that I think it's not obvious, but it should actually be lodged at the center with the central budget, is actually a macro-fiscal stabilization role. Namely, that if you have a recession in parts of the union, well, that has externalities. That has, you know, that function should be fulfilled to a large extent at the central level, just like in the U.S., for example. So there are questions there, but it seems that Macron is going in that direction. A number of European leaders in the past, the French, the Germans, the Italians, have been arguing for that in one way or the other, some saying, well, it's not yet, we are not yet there, but it makes sense. Now Macron brings a fresh push to that, hopefully, but it will all actually be a little bit clearer after the German elections.
So from Broadway to the EU, Hamilton is more relevant than ever. Again, have to.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's so much Broadway. No, I think that the thick volume, you know, really reflects the Coast Guard, the federal tax, customs, you know.
Don't let my glibness be treated as a serious comment. Let me ask you about another disrupting factor. President Trump sees himself as a disruptor. That's what he ran on, that he was going to shake up the system and seemingly apply that also to a NATO alliance and European friends. Has the Trump presidency, in a sort of unintended consequences way, brought European leaders closer together?
Well, I would actually say it's not disruptor, but deconstructor.
Deconstructor.
Right. Yes, the answer is unequivocally yes. It's something that, in fact, should help Europe, first of all, to come up to the plate and you know, raise defense expenditures to 2% of GDP. It's eminently sensible. This is a can that has been kicked down the road for quite a while, and now minds are being focused on that, European leaders, to pursue that goal, to go towards that goal. A pivotal realization of that, if you wish, is the beer hall speech by Chancellor Merkel, where he said, well, you know, after what we have seen, G7, G20 meetings, we are really left to our own fate. Mm-hmm. We have to fend for ourselves. All of that pointing in the direction of a more assertive defense posture and also a common defense posture. It could be really, it could have tremendous economic benefits as well. You know, common procurement, lack of duplication of weapons and so forth. It makes a lot of sense. I think we can really attribute credit to President Trump for bringing together the Europeans mm-hmm. and NATO.
A final thought, George, is about...
And then, of course, Vladimir Putin also had a role in this from the other side. So these external policy postures actually are helpful for Europe to unify further and to integrate further.
Clarifies who your friends are and who your potential adversaries are. About trend lines, I want to ask you before we wrap, is what will you be watching that will indicate to you that the Union is trending toward a more close union versus a disintegration?
Well, I think the German elections are critical in this matter. But equally, there are a number of events or non-events in the enforcement of the existing rules in Europe, fiscal rules particularly, which has not been the case in the past. At the same time also, this is a challenge which the Fed is facing as well. The European Central Bank has to gradually taper its non-conventional, very aggressive stimulus, and something else will have to, of course, then take its place, which is what I was referring to before. But there are question marks, and hopefully there are not going to be negative surprises along the way.
Well, George, great to have you back in town for even a brief visit and this opportunity to catch up with you. And thanks for all this valuable information, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate it.